General Vector stood in the center of the War Council chamber, his three hearts beating faster than they had in decades. The massive room was circular, with seats rising up on all sides like an arena. 50 council members stared down at him, their faces showing everything from boredom to irritation. None of them looked worried. That was the problem. He pressed a button on his data pad. The holographic display behind him lit up with footage from 3 weeks ago. The council members leaned forward slightly. They were watching a human ship, small and damaged, surrounded by 6 pirate vessels near the border of known space. "This is recent footage from the neutral zone," Vector said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Watch what happens next." The human ship should have surrendered. It was outgunned, outnumbered, and leaking atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Any reasonable species would have sent a distress signal and hoped for mercy. Instead, the small craft spun on its axis and fired everything it had at the largest pirate ship. The blast tore through the pirate's shields and crippled its engines. "Note the tactical choice," Vector continued. "The human pilot could have tried to run. Instead, he chose to take his enemy with him." The footage continued. The pirate ships opened fire, tearing the human vessel apart. But in those final seconds before his ship exploded, the human pilot launched his escape pod directly at another pirate vessel. The pod, modified with explosive charges, struck the pirate ship's bridge and detonated. 2 pirate ships destroyed, 1 human dead. The remaining pirates fled. High Chancellor Zoreth, the leader of the Crithian Empire, made a dismissive gesture. "One lucky pilot proves nothing, General. Pirates are cowards. They run from anything that fights back." Vector had expected this response. He changed the display. "This is from a border dispute 2 months ago. A human colony world called New Houston. Population, 8,000. They were facing a fleet of raiders 20 ships strong. The new footage showed a small planetary settlement with minimal defenses. The raiders sent the standard demand: surrender all resources and accept slavery or be destroyed. The human response came in the form of a single transmission. A woman's voice, calm and cold, said only 3 words: "Come and take it." The battle lasted 6 hours. The humans fought with mining equipment, civilian ships, and improvised weapons. They booby-trapped their own buildings. They rammed raiders with cargo haulers. By the time the raiders retreated, they had lost 14 ships. The human colony was in ruins, but the survivors were already rebuilding. "They lost 3,000 people," one council member said. "That's not victory. That's suicide." "That's my point," Vector said, his voice rising with urgency. "They don't think like us. They don't calculate acceptable losses the same way. I've studied their history, their culture, their psychology. Humans have a word for what drives them. They call it spite." The council chamber filled with confused murmurs. Zoreth raised one hand for silence. "Explain." Vector pulled up more data. "In their history, humans have fought wars that lasted decades. They've held positions against impossible odds. They've refused surrender even when it would have saved their lives. There's a pattern in every conflict they've ever been part of. The harder you push them, the harder they push back. They don't break. They don't give up. They get angry, and they make that anger into a weapon." He showed them battle footage, historical records, even cultural references from human entertainment. Stories where the hero kept fighting despite being wounded, outnumbered, or outmatched. Music that celebrated never surrendering. Monuments to soldiers who had died rather than retreat. "They celebrate their failures as much as their victories," Vector said. "They have a saying, victory or death, and they mean it literally." Zoreth stood from his throne. "General, you've served the Empire for 40 years. You've conquered 17 worlds. Are you seriously telling this council that you're afraid of a species that controls only 47 planets?" The chamber went quiet. Vector felt the weight of every eye on him. He had one chance to make them understand. I'm telling you that humanity is different from every species we've ever encountered. They're not stronger than us, they're not smarter, but they have something we don't understand. When we fight, we calculate odds. We weigh costs and benefits, we know when to retreat. Humans don't seem to have that switch in their minds. They just keep coming. He pulled up one final video. It showed a human soldier, wounded and alone, facing 5 enemy fighters. The logical choice was surrender. Instead, the human charged. He killed 3 before they brought him down. The remaining 2 enemies were so shaken that they retreated. I'm asking this council to reconsider the invasion plans, Vectar said. Humanity is small now, yes. But if we attack them, if we give them a reason to unite against us, we'll face something worse than a strong enemy. We'll face an enemy that refuses to lose. Zoreth walked down the steps to stand face to face with Vectar. The Empire controls 3,000 systems. Our fleets number in the tens of thousands. You want us to fear a species with fewer than 50 colonies? I want us to be wise, Vectar said quietly. The vote was called. 47 council members voted to proceed with demanding humanity's submission. 3 voted against. Vectar wasn't surprised. He had known they wouldn't listen. Pride never did. Zoreth smiled. Since you know so much about humans, General, you'll lead the first fleet to their nearest colony. Show them the price of defiance. Vectar saluted, his hand shaking slightly. As you command, Chancellor. That night, alone in his quarters, Vectar recorded a personal message. He encrypted it and stored it in his private files, knowing that someday someone might need to understand what had happened here. I tried to warn them, he said to the recording device. I showed them what humans are capable of, but they saw weakness where there was strength. They saw a small empire where there was a sleeping giant. I don't know if the Crithian Empire will survive what comes next, but I know this. We had a chance to avoid this war, and we threw it away. May the stars forgive us for what we're about to do. He ended the recording and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity waited, unaware of what was coming. Vectar whispered a prayer to gods he wasn't sure existed anymore. Please, he said, let me be wrong about them. But in his 3 hearts, he knew he wasn't. The colony world of New Austin had been peaceful for 23 years. The 3,000 people who lived there were miners, farmers, and families looking for a quiet life away from Earth's crowded cities. They had simple homes, a small spaceport, and enough defensive weapons to handle pirates. Nothing more. Commander Ryan Parker was drinking his morning coffee when the alarms went off. He was a former Earth military officer who had retired to New Austin 5 years ago. The most exciting thing he usually dealt with was broken mining equipment. Not anymore. Sir, we have contacts, his assistant said, running into the command center. Big ones, 50 ships, at least. Ryan set down his coffee cup and looked at the displays. His blood went cold. The ships weren't human designs. They were massive, covered in weapons, and moving into orbit around New Austin like they owned the place. Dr. Lisa Chen rushed to the communications station. She was the colony's xenobiologist and had been waiting her whole life for first contact with aliens. Just not like this. I'm sending greetings in every language we know, Lisa said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Ryan watched the alien fleet take up positions above the colony. Get everyone to the underground shelters. Now. This doesn't feel like a friendly visit. The response came 30 minutes later. A hologram appeared in the center of the command room, showing an alien that looked like a cross between a lizard and an insect. It wore elaborate robes and spoke through a translator device. I am High Chancellor Zoreth of the Crithian Empire. You are now in Imperial space. You have 24 hours to surrender all weapons, pay tribute, and accept our authority. If you refuse, your colony will be pacified by force. These terms are not negotiable. The hologram vanished before anyone could respond. Lisa looked at Ryan in shock. They can't be serious. We're just a mining colony. We have nothing worth fighting over. Ryan started pulling up defensive plans on his screen. They don't care what we have. They care that we're here. Get everyone underground. Anyone who can fight, send them to me. Everyone else needs to be as deep in those mines as possible. Captain Nicole Hayes was at the spaceport when the evacuation order came through. She was a freighter captain, hauling ore between colonies. Her ship wasn't military, but it had engines and cargo space. That would have to be enough. Ryan, you can't be thinking about fighting, Nicole said over the comm. Look at them. We have 6 armed shuttles and some mining explosives. They have a fleet. I know the odds, Ryan said, but I also know what happens to colonies that surrender to empires like this. I've read the history books. They take everything and leave us with nothing, or worse. Nicole looked at her crew. They were scared, but they were nodding. What do you need? Load your cargo holds with explosives, anything that can damage a ship. We're going to make them pay for every inch of our sky. The 24 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world. Ryan organized the 300 people willing to fight. They had mining equipment, hunting rifles, and a whole lot of anger. The other 2,700 people went deep into the mines where the alien sensors would have trouble finding them. When the deadline passed, the Crithian fleet opened fire. The orbital bombardment lit up the sky like fireworks. Buildings exploded. The spaceport became a crater. The colony's few defensive guns fired back, doing minimal damage before being destroyed. It looked like a massacre. But the humans had learned something from their own bloody history. You can destroy buildings, but if your enemy is underground, the war isn't over. The Crithian dropships landed 6 hours into the bombardment. General Vector led the first wave personally, as ordered. He had 2,000 soldiers, advanced weapons, and air support. The humans had hiding spots and determination. The first landing zone was in the main settlement. Vector's soldiers spread out, expecting to find survivors cowering in the ruins. Instead, they found empty streets and an unsettling silence. The explosion came from underground. Mining charges buried under the street detonated all at once. 50 soldiers disappeared in fire and debris. Before the survivors could react, humans emerged from tunnels and buildings, firing weapons and throwing improvised explosives. Vector watched from his command ship in horror. This wasn't how conquered people were supposed to act. They were supposed to be afraid, broken, ready to submit. Instead, these humans fought like they had nothing to lose. Captain Nicole Hayes piloted her freighter straight at a Crithian supply ship. Her cargo hold was packed with mining explosives and fuel cells. She broadcast one message before impact. New Austin doesn't surrender. The explosion destroyed the supply ship and damaged 2 nearby vessels. Nicole and her crew of 7 were gone in an instant. But they had bought the colony time and took out a major piece of the Crithian logistics chain. The battle continued for 3 days. Ryan's forces used the mines like a fortress, emerging to strike and then vanishing underground. They booby-trapped every building. They used the planet itself as a weapon, causing avalanches and detonating gas pockets in the mines when Crithian soldiers got too close. Vector lost 400 soldiers, taking a colony of 3,000 people. When the surviving humans finally ran out of ammunition and explosives, only 200 were left alive. Every single one had to be captured by force. Not one surrendered. Ryan Parker was pulled from a collapsed tunnel, badly wounded but still trying to detonate one last charge. He looked at Vector with eyes full of hatred and defiance. "You won," Ryan said, coughing up blood. "But Earth will hear about this, and when they do, you're going to wish you'd never found us." Vectar had him taken to medical care against the protests of other Crithian officers who wanted the prisoners executed. He couldn't explain why he did it. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear. That night, Vectar sent another encrypted message to the High Council. New Austin has fallen. Casualties: 400 of our soldiers, 2,800 humans. Recommendation: immediate withdrawal and peace negotiations. The response came back within an hour. Unacceptable. You will proceed to the next human colony. Resistance must be crushed completely. Vectar sat in his command chair looking at the burning planet below. The surviving humans were being held in the few buildings still standing. They weren't crying or begging. They were singing. He had the translator identify the song. It was an old Earth anthem about freedom and defiance. A young Crithian officer approached him. "General, the prisoners are being difficult. Should we silence them?" Vectar shook his head slowly. "No. Let them sing. They've earned it." The officer looked confused, but obeyed. Vectar continued staring at the planet. New Austin had been a minor colony, barely worth noticing, and it had cost him 400 soldiers and 3 days of brutal fighting. There were 46 more human colonies out there, and Earth itself. For the first time in his long military career, General Vectar felt something he had never experienced before. He felt genuine fear of his enemy. The news from New Austin reached Earth in 72 hours. A small message drone had escaped the battle and made the long jump home. When President Daniel Cruz received the report, he sat in silence for a full minute. Then he stood up and called an emergency session of the United Earth Coalition. Fleet Admiral Amy Rodriguez was already in the war room when the president arrived. She was a career military officer who had spent 30 years preparing for this exact moment. Most people thought the defense fleet was just for pirates and accidents. They were wrong. "How bad is it?" Daniel asked. Amy pulled up the tactical display. "New Austin is gone. 3,000 people, and only 200 survived. The Crithian fleet is moving toward New Boston next. Population: 15,000. Daniel felt anger burning in his chest. He had visited New Austin once. He remembered children playing in the streets, families working in the mines, people living peaceful lives. Now, most of them were dead. "What are our options?" he asked. Amy smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. President, we've been preparing for this since the first colony ship left Earth. Every world has hidden defensive systems. Every civilian ship has weapons that can be activated. Every citizen has completed basic military training. We told everyone it was for pirates, but the real reason was this. We always knew someone out there might want to take what's ours." She pressed a button, and the display changed. Ships that looked like cargo haulers transformed into missile platforms. Mining stations revealed hidden railguns. Civilian space stations deployed fighter craft from concealed hangars. "For 50 years, we've been building a military while pretending we weren't," Amy continued. "Every human colony has enough firepower to give an invasion fleet a very bad day. And Earth itself has weapons that make all of that look small." Daniel walked around the display, looking at the numbers. "How many ships can we field?" "Active military fleet, 3,000 ships. Activated civilian ships with hidden weapons, another 7,000. We can't match the Crithian Empire's numbers, but we don't need to. We just need to make them bleed enough that they stop." "What about losses?" Daniel asked the question that hurt to even think about. Amy's face went hard. "Sir, we're going to lose millions of people before this is over. Maybe more. But if we don't fight, we lose everything. And after what they did to New Austin, every human in the galaxy wants blood." Daniel made his decision. "Contact all colonies. Full military activation. Every ship, every weapon, every person. Send one message to the Crithian Empire. Tell them they wanted one of our worlds. Now they get to face all of us." Captain Chris Bennett commanded the Experimental Weapons Division on Europa Station, hidden in Jupiter's orbit. His team had been working on a secret project for 15 years. They called it the Hammer. "We're go for full activation," Chris said to his crew. "Time to see if this thing actually works." The Hammer was a railgun that used Jupiter's magnetic field to accelerate projectiles to 5% of light speed. One shot could punch through any known shield and keep going through the ship behind it. The problem was, they had never fired it at a real target. "Target locked," his weapons officer said. "Crithian supply convoy heading toward New Boston." Chris took a deep breath. "Fire!" The magnetic fields aligned. Power flowed from the station's reactor. The projectile, just a solid tungsten rod 3 meters long, shot out of the barrel faster than most people could blink. 17 seconds later, the lead ship in the Crithian convoy simply disappeared. The projectile had hit it dead center, turned the entire ship into vapor, and continued through 2 more ships behind it. The convoy scattered in panic. "Target destroyed," the weapons officer said in shock. "Sir, we just killed 3 ships with 1 shot." Chris allowed himself a small smile. "Ready another round. We've got a lot more targets to hit." The first major battle happened at the Meridian system, 3 weeks after New Austin fell. The Crithian fleet came in with 6,000 ships, expecting to crush the human defenders through sheer numbers. Admiral Amy Rodriguez was waiting with 2,000 military ships and 3,000 armed civilian vessels. "This is Admiral Rodriguez to all ships," she broadcast. "The Crithians think we're weak because we're small. Let's teach them the difference between weakness and mercy. We offered mercy. They chose war. Now they get to see what happens when you make humanity angry." The battle lasted 18 hours. The humans used tactics the Crithians had never seen before. Ships with dead engines pretended to drift, then fired at point-blank range when enemy vessels came close. Automated drones, guided by artificial intelligence, made kamikaze runs at Crithian capitals. Human fighters refused to retreat even when their ships were on fire and falling apart. One human destroyer, the New Hope, lost engines and life support 12 hours into the battle. The captain, an older woman named Helen Ross, used the last of her ship's power to aim at a Crithian battlecruiser. She broadcast one final message. "My ship dies. Your ship dies. Fair trade." The New Hope rammed the battlecruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded. The wreckage took out 2 nearby Crithian frigates. When the battle ended, the Crithian fleet retreated. They had started with 6,000 ships. They left with 3,800. The humans had lost 900 ships, but they held the system. General Vector watched the battle data from his command ship and felt his worst fears coming true. The numbers were wrong. The humans should have lost. They were outnumbered 3-1, but they had fought with a ferocity that broke Crithian morale. He pulled up casualty reports. Every human ship that was destroyed had fought until it physically couldn't anymore. Not one had surrendered. Not one had retreated until ordered. They had turned their own deaths into weapons. Vector made a decision that would be seen as treason. He couldn't watch his people walk into extinction. He opened a heavily encrypted channel and sent a message to human-controlled space. "This is General Vector of the Crithian Empire. I am sending you complete tactical data on our fleet positions, supply lines, and defensive systems. I tried to warn my people about humanity. They didn't listen. Now I must save them from their own pride. Use this information. End this war quickly. The longer it continues, the more both our people will suffer." He attached every piece of classified information he had access to and sent it. Then he erased any trace of the transmission and went back to his duties. If he was caught, he would be executed as a traitor. But if humanity destroyed the Crithian Empire, at least some of his people might survive. On Earth, President Daniel Cruz received the intelligence package and called in his military leaders. "Is this real?" he asked. Amy Rodriguez ran the data through every security check they had. It's real, and it's detailed. This is coming from someone very high up in the Crithian command structure. It could be a trap, another general warned. Daniel looked at the data, supply routes, fleet positions, communication codes, weakness in their defensive systems. If it's a trap, it's the worst trap I've ever seen. This information could win us the war. Then we use it, Amy said. We hit them hard, hit them fast, and we don't stop until they beg for peace. Daniel nodded. Send the order. All fleets, full offensive. We're taking the fight to them. Across human space, fleets began to move. The defensive war was over. Now came revenge. 6 months had passed since the war began, and High Chancellor Zoreth was starting to understand fear. The Crithian Empire had never lost a war in its 3,000-year history. Now they were losing to a species they had dismissed as primitive. The casualty reports came in every day. Another fleet destroyed, another supply line cut, another world refusing to send troops because the soldiers were terrified of fighting humans. The Empire was bleeding, and Zoreth didn't know how to stop it. We still outnumber them, he told his war council. We have more ships, more soldiers, more resources. One of the council members, an old general named Torkan, spoke up. Numbers mean nothing if our soldiers are too afraid to fight. The humans don't fear death. Our soldiers do. That makes all the difference. Zoreth slammed his fist on the table. Then we break their will to fight. We show them what real terror looks like. That decision would doom the Empire. The colony world of New Terra was home to 15 million humans. It was a beautiful place, with blue oceans and green forests. Families lived there. Children went to school there. It was peaceful. The biological weapon hit New Terra at dawn. It was invisible, odorless, and designed specifically to attack human biology. Within a week, 2 million people were dead. Within 2 weeks, the number reached 5 million. The hospitals overflowed. The crematoriums ran day and night. Lieutenant Emma Foster was part of a black operations team when she heard about New Terra. She was on a ship deep in Crithian space, preparing for a sabotage mission. When the news came through, she stopped working and just stared at the wall. My sister lived there, she said quietly. She was a teacher. She had 2 kids. Her commander, a man named Carl Bishop, put a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry. Emma stood up, her face hard as stone. Sorry doesn't bring her back, but making them pay might make me feel better. The mission had been to destroy a supply depot. Emma changed the plan. She contacted Admiral Rodriguez directly. Ma'am, request permission to modify our objective. The supply depot can wait. I want to hit their propaganda network. Amy understood immediately. What do you have in mind? We make sure every single Crithian citizen knows what their government is doing. We show them the biological weapon. We show them the children dying. We make it impossible for them to pretend this is a clean war. Approved. Do it. Emma and her team of 12 operatives infiltrated the Crithian capital world. They didn't attack military targets. They didn't kill civilians. They went straight for the planet's communication hub, the nerve center that controlled all information in the Empire. It took them 3 days to reach it and 6 hours to hack into the system. What they did next changed everything. Every screen in the Crithian Empire suddenly showed the same thing. Footage from New Terra, children dying in hospitals, mass graves, survivors crying over bodies. And then they showed something else. They showed General Vectar's original warning to the War Council. The broadcast played on repeat for 2 hours before Crithian security forces regained control. But 2 hours was enough. Billions of Crithians saw what their empire had done. They saw their leader ignore the warning. They saw the consequences. Riots broke out on 17 Crithian worlds within a week. Citizens demanded answers. Some demanded the war end immediately. Others called for High Chancellor Zoreth to be removed from power. Commander Jake Harris led the human counteroffensive with cold efficiency. He was young for a fleet commander, only 35. But he had proven himself in every battle. He was also a tactical genius who knew how to use the intelligence General Vectar had provided. "All ships, listen up," Jake broadcast to his fleet of 800 vessels. "We're hitting the Crithian supply lines at 3 points simultaneously. They can't defend all of them at once. We destroy their logistics. We win the war without firing another shot at their fleets." The attacks were surgical and devastating. Fuel depots exploded. Food shipments were destroyed. Communication relays went dark. The Crithian military machine, which had seemed unstoppable, began to grind to a halt. General Vectar received a message on his private channel. It was encrypted with codes only he and a handful of others knew. The message was simple. "Thank you for the information. We need to talk." Vectar sat alone in his quarters, staring at the message. This was it. The moment he crossed the line from traitor in secret to traitor in fact. He thought about his people, about the empire he had served his whole life, about the countless deaths on both sides. He typed a response. "I'm listening." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Vectar spoke with Commander Jake Harris, providing even more detailed information. Not just military data, but cultural information. How the Crithian government worked, which council members might support peace, where the empire was weakest politically. "Why are you doing this?" Jake asked at one point. "You're betraying your own people." Vectar's response came after a long pause. "I'm trying to save my people. If this war continues, humanity will destroy us. Not because you're stronger, but because you won't stop. I saw that from the beginning. My leaders wouldn't listen. So now I do the only thing I can. I help you win quickly, before both our species bleed to death." "You know what your people will call you," Jake said. "Yes, traitor, coward, monster. I accept that. History will judge me. But if my people survive, that's enough." Jake was quiet for a moment. "When this war ends, I'll speak for you. I can't promise mercy, but I can promise truth." "That's more than I deserve," Vectar said. Together they planned something audacious. They would strike at the heart of the Empire, not to destroy the Crithian homeworld, but to capture High Chancellor Zoreth alive. They would end the war by cutting off its head. The plan required perfect coordination. Vectar provided the security codes. Jake provided the ships and soldiers. Emma Foster and her team would lead the ground assault. 3 months after New Terra's destruction, the human fleet appeared in orbit around the Crithian homeworld. The defenders were ready, but they weren't ready for what happened next. Half of the Crithian defensive fleet simply stopped fighting. Vectar had contacted sympathetic commanders, officers who had lost faith in the war. They didn't join the humans, but they didn't fight them either. They just moved their ships aside. The battle for the Crithian capital lasted 3 days. It was brutal, bloody, and desperate. But unlike the Empire's attack on human worlds, the humans were careful. They targeted military installations, not civilians. They avoided hospitals, schools, and residential areas. Emma Foster led her team directly to the High Chancellor's palace. They fought through elite guards, disabled security systems, and breached the inner sanctum. Zoreth was there, surrounded by his personal guard. "Kill them," Zoreth ordered. The guards looked at each other. One of them dropped his weapon, then another, then all of them. "I'm sorry, Chancellor," one guard said, "but we've seen the broadcasts. We know what you did. We know you ignored General Vectar's warning. We won't die for your pride." Zoreth stared in shock as his own guard surrendered. Emma walked up to him calmly. "High Chancellor Zoreth, I am placing you under arrest for war crimes. You will stand trial." Zoreth laughed bitterly. "You think this ends anything? My empire will never surrender." Emma leaned close. "Your empire already has. You just don't know it yet." She was right. Within hours of Zoreth's capture, 17 Crithian worlds declared independence from the Empire. 20 more demanded peace negotiations. The government that had ruled for 3,000 years collapsed in less than a week. General Vectar turned himself in to human forces the day after Zoreth's capture. "I am General Vectar. I have committed treason against my empire. I am ready to face justice." Commander Jake Harris met him personally. "You saved millions of lives, on both sides." "I helped you destroy my empire," Vectar said. "You helped us end a war that should never have started," Jake corrected. "There's a difference." The trial of High Chancellor Zoreth lasted 3 months. It was held on Earth, broadcast across both human and former Crithian space. The galaxy watched as the leader who had started a war faced the consequences of his actions. President Daniel Cruz sat in the observers section, watching the proceedings. The courtroom was massive, designed to hold representatives from dozens of worlds. Humans sat on one side, Crithians sat on the other. Both groups looked tired. The prosecutor, a human lawyer named Patricia Moore, presented evidence methodically. She showed the footage of General Vectar's warning to the War Council. She showed Zoreth's dismissive response. She presented casualty numbers: 7 million humans dead, 12 million Crithians dead. She showed footage of New Terra's biological weapon attack. "The defendant had multiple opportunities to avoid this war," Patricia said. "He was warned by his own general. He chose pride over wisdom. He chose violence over diplomacy, and when the war turned against him, he chose to use weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations." Zoreth's defense was weak. His lawyer argued that he had acted in what he believed were the Empire's best interests, that the humans had appeared to be weak, that no one could have predicted their response. General Vectar was called as a witness. He walked into the courtroom in simple clothes, not his military uniform. He had given that up. He looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and grief. "General Vectar," Patricia said, "please tell the court what you told the War Council before the invasion began." Vectar spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "I told them that humanity was different, that humans don't surrender, that they fight harder when pushed, that they have a cultural trait they call spite, which makes them willing to die rather than submit. I begged the council to pursue diplomacy instead of war. I showed them evidence. I explained the risks." And how did the defendant respond? He asked if I was afraid of a species with only 47 colonies. He dismissed my concerns. He ordered the invasion to proceed. And when I asked to be removed from the campaign, he denied my request and ordered me to lead the first attack. Patricia played the recording of that moment. The entire courtroom heard Zoreth's words, dripping with arrogance and contempt. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Zoreth was sentenced to life imprisonment. He would spend the rest of his days watching the empire he had destroyed try to rebuild itself. Commander Jake Harris stood before another court shortly after. This one was convened to decide General Vectar's fate. The charges were treason, providing classified information to an enemy, and conspiracy to overthrow his own government. Jake was called as a witness. General Vectar provided intelligence that saved millions of lives, human and Crithian both. Without his help, this war would have lasted years longer. The death toll would have been in the hundreds of millions. A Crithian prosecutor argued back. "He betrayed his own people. He helped you destroy our empire." Jake shook his head. "He helped us end a war that his own leader started against his advice. He didn't betray his people. He saved them from total destruction. If the war had continued, humanity would have pushed all the way to the Crithian homeworld. We would have done to every Crithian colony what they did to New Austin. We would have used biological weapons like they used on New Terra. General Vectar prevented that." The court was divided. Half wanted Vectar executed, half wanted him pardoned. President Daniel Cruz made the final decision. General Vectar acted to prevent genocide, Daniel said in his ruling. He tried to stop the war before it started. When that failed, he tried to end it as quickly as possible. His actions were technically treason, but they were morally correct. Therefore, I am issuing a full pardon. Furthermore, I am offering him the position of Crethian ambassador to Earth if he chooses to accept. Vectar accepted. 3 years passed. The former Crethian Empire was now a federation of independent worlds. Some joined humanity in a mutual defense pact. Others chose to remain neutral. But the days of imperial conquest were over. Dr. Kate Sullivan published her book, The General Who Knew. It became required reading in military academies across known space. The book detailed Vectar's warning, the Council's dismissal, and the terrible war that followed. It had one simple thesis: wisdom ignored leads to disaster. The book's dedication read, "To the 7 million humans and 12 million Crethians who died because pride was valued over truth." On the 5th anniversary of the war's end, a memorial was built on New Austin. It was a simple structure, a wall with the names of every person who had died in the conflict. Human names on one side, Crethian names on the other. Commander Jake Harris, now Admiral Harris, stood at the memorial with General Vectar. Both of them looked older. The war had aged everyone who survived it. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "Helping us?" Vectar was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my people didn't listen. But no, I don't regret trying to save lives." "Your people call you a traitor." "Some do. Others call me the one who saved the Crethian species from extinction. History will decide which name sticks." They stood in silence, reading names. So many names. "We did terrible things to each other," Jake said finally. "Both sides." "Yes," Vectar agreed. "War brings out the worst in everyone. That's why it should always be the last option, not the first." A group of young cadets approached the memorial. A mix of humans and Crethians. They were part of a new joint military academy, learning to work together instead of against each other. One of them, a young Crethian female, recognized Vectar. "General, can I ask you something?" Vectar nodded. "Of course." "In your testimony at the trial, you said you tried to warn your people. Why didn't they listen?" Vectar looked at the young cadet, then at the wall of names. "Because they saw weakness where there was strength. They saw opportunity where there was danger. They believed their own propaganda about being superior. And most importantly, they didn't want to believe that they might be wrong." "What would you tell young officers now?" another cadet asked, this one human. Vectar smiled sadly. "I would tell them to listen to warnings even when they're uncomfortable. Especially when they're uncomfortable. I would tell them that the strongest warrior is the one who avoids unnecessary fights, and I would tell them that pride is the most expensive luxury in the universe." Jake added, "I would tell them that every name on this wall represents someone who should still be alive, someone who had family, friends, dreams. War isn't glorious, it's waste. If you have to fight, fight smart and fight to end it quickly. But always remember that peace is better than victory." The cadets took notes, asked more questions, and eventually left to continue their tour. Jake and Vectar remained at the memorial. "Do you think it will last?" Vectar asked. "The peace?" Jake considered the question. "I think we'll try to make it last. Both our species learned something from this war. We learned what happens when you push humans. You learned what happens when you ignore good advice. Those are expensive lessons. We'd be fools to forget them." "Fools start wars," Vectar said. "Wise people prevent them." 20 years after the war ended, General Vectar stood in a lecture hall at Earth's military academy. He was old now, His scales faded with age. But his mind was still sharp, and his message was still important. "I want to tell you what I learned about humans during the war," he told the assembled cadets. "Humans don't fight because they're strong. They fight because giving up isn't in their vocabulary. They fight when they're wounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. They fight when any logical species would surrender, and that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy." A cadet raised his hand. "Sir, do you regret trying to warn your people?" Vector had heard that question many times over the years. His answer never changed. "I regret that they didn't listen. I regret the millions who died. But I don't regret trying to do the right thing. That's something I learned from humanity. You do what's right, even when it's hard, even when no one listens, even when it costs you everything." Another cadet asked, "What's the most important lesson from the war?" Vector walked to the window and looked out at Earth's blue sky. "The most important lesson is this: wisdom is worthless if no one listens to it. My people had the information they needed to avoid a catastrophic war. They chose to ignore it. That choice cost millions of lives and destroyed an empire that had stood for 3,000 years. So listen to your advisors. Question your assumptions. And remember that sometimes the strongest action is choosing not to fight." The lecture ended. The cadets filed out, discussing what they had heard. Vector remained, looking out at the peaceful sky. Somewhere up there, former Crithian worlds were rebuilding. Somewhere up there, the new Austin colony had been restored, a new generation living where the old one had died. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through history forever, and perhaps, just perhaps, those lessons would prevent the next war before it started. That was all Vector could hope for.